Thanks very much, Juan, for the introduction. I'll jump on the presentation. I'll try to keep it, short and to the point. And this is an important topic, as I'll try to, emphasize how important is the maternity. But yes, for the past few years, we've been working more and more with these, beef dairy cross breeding programs. So part of this presentation is I'm going to give you an approach, a practical approach on how we look at data on a farm and how, not only just at the maternity, but also how cows perform after we implement, these programs. So something that I'm going to cover a little bit of the basics, and because a number of things that we're going to talk now has a genetic component. So something important when we work with some of the farms and we look at bulls is that we need to know the gestation length, and what is the normal gestation length. And here on this topic there is quite variation in gestation length between and within breeds. And so here in this, on the left side of the screen you have the dairy cows, and on the the right side you have the beef breeds, and each one of them, these are just average, right? And I'm going to go now in a little bit more detail because there is a variation there even within each of the breeds, right? But it's important to keep in mind the different average gestation length that each one of the breed has. Right. So most of us, especially myself, working with Holstein cows, Jerseys, and some of the crosses, right? And so those are particularly the ones that I have to work with. And then I see some of these, depending on the farm, they are using different beef bull, according whether they are Jersey cows or they're Holstein cows, or they're using just, crosses like Jersey Holstein cow crosses. And they select a particular bull for the cow. So there is also important, variation in calf birth weight, right? And I'm gonna touch on these two components now because this is very important, and we have very reliable information, when it comes to the selection. Most of the farms do use an index, right, for the replacement heifers, whether whatever the breed is on the farm, but they also are using an index when it comes to select the beef bulls, right? And that is just trying to balance and make add a little bit more value to the cross calf. And but calf birth weight is important. It's a huge variation according to the breed, from 25 to 58 kilos, or from 55 pounds to 125 pounds. So keep in mind some of these average gestation length, because I'm going to talk about this and how these may or may not impact calving problem. And remember that gestation length, especially at the very end, is associated with calf birth weight. There is an association. So the longer the gestation, the higher the birth weight of the calf, right? So there have been some, studies on gestation length, and I think from the genetic point of view, and but also from the phenotype, right, from how cows perform according to gestation length. And the most important is that I did mention in the previous slide, for Holstein cows, right, 279 days. So in reality, when we go to the farm now and we start looking at the farm, there is like, the cows are about 276 plus minus 6 days. This is our, what we observe in the, the phenotype on some of the cows. And there is a variation that I did mention, this variation is what we consider normal gestation length. Right, so there are cows with short gestation length, right, between 256 to 269. The average, what is the bulk of the cows, so most of the cows are going to be between, this average 270 to 283, right? And then we have a group of cows that is about the same size. I'll show you some data now in a minute. That is about the short gestation. That is what we consider the long gestation, right? Cows that are, 283 to 296. This is absolutely important when we assess, the maternity effect. We are looking either, how the dairy bulls are performing, but also how beef bulls are performing, that we stratify by gestation length, because this is the normal range, especially for Holstein cows, right? When there is here is a study where I provide really nice information when it comes to the performance of the cows according to gestation length, that is health event, right? It's milk, longevity, because it affects, when you affect health, you are affecting, cyclicity, and you are affecting choline. So in a way, it affects longevity in cows, right? And it also, whether a cow has a short gestation length or a long gestation length, it could affect the offspring, right? How they perform, in life. And usually, most of the issues that we see in cows is either with short or with long gestation length, right? The middle is what we have most of the, the best performance in cows. When you look at a stillbirth, these are dead calf within 48 hours. That is how the USDA now keep record of at a national level. So these are all the US, dairy, according to the National Animal Health Monitoring System. And you can see significant progress. And I'm going to present data now, what we have in 2022, right? But you can see a measure significant progress, not from the, the genetic component of the cow, but also from the phenotype. We see that in the field. So back in 2007, the average for, calf mortality at Calving was about 6.5. So it has been a major improvement 7 years later, right, about 5.5. And now we have a number of farms. So a number of farms that we go that they are below 2%, right? So these are even 100% Holstein or Holstein that are using beef, beef bull. So we know that it's possible to have this program, but it has to be, a little bit consideration some of the management, what we call the management rate, right? So when it comes to the beef, component and business, this is what we see, right? And so a number of farms that use an index, and there are several indexes, and according to the breed of the cow, whether they are a Holstein cow or whether they are a Jersey cow, kind of the two extremes, because they are completely different, and you had to balance the offspring according to what is the breed of the cow. So from the farm point of view, it's definitely the calving is absolutely a priority. And I'm going to explain why is this, because this is associated with dry matter intake, right? So when cows go through a rough labor, right, and especially heifers, fed lactation cow, they will really struggle early on in lactation. They will lose significant amount of weight to compensate milk, but that is because of pain. So pain is negative with dry matter intake and is negative with water intake early on. So we don't want to have those, because that might, may affect in a negative way the onset of lactation of the cow, which is absolutely important because that determines health, it determines cyclicity, and it determines the future performance of the cow, reproductive performance and milk performance, of the cow. So from the feedlot point of view, from the feed yard, right, there are different emphases here. It's not necessarily what we want at the farm. And from the feedlot, they just, the days on feed is important because it has to be sustainable, the business. So economics really matter, right? And feed conversion, those are absolutely important traits, right? And we know when we have, here is an example, Jersey Angus crosses, right? It takes longer to finish. So this is an important component when it comes to the feedlot, and the animals need to look like, beef animals, and that is important. And within that, definitely you don't want to have tall animals or too narrow, right? Because they cause issues, especially the tall animal, right? They do have a discount, right? And then you have another important component in the meat industry, in the beef industry, is the processor, right? The processor will look at the carcass length, right? Especially, like I mentioned before, the tall animals, especially those Holstein cows. Not all farm has this. We work with a number of farms that has Holstein cows, but I can tell that there is about 200 or maybe 250 pound differences in some of the farms. So there are different, from a moderate frame to really tall cows, right? When you do some of these tall cows, so and they use Angus bulls, so the Angus, Holstein crosses, right? You really need to select a particular bull there to make sure it's not too long, the carcass, because I will have a discount at the processor level. The muscle, that is important, especially, because this is what are undesirable visual, things. And when it comes to, the meat, and for most of the crosses, I would say that the quality grade is acceptable for most of these beef dairy crosses. But this is just, I cannot provide you an overview of how each one of the components are looking at the same animal, right? You have the maternity here, so now the cross calf has to go through the feedlot, and then from the feedlot to the processor, and finally go to the consumer, right? So what I'm gonna from now on, I'm gonna focus just only at the dairy farm and why gestation length and calving is important in this beef dairy crossbreeding program, right? So and I'm gonna try to answer question in a practical way. These are questions that I received over the year, especially the last, I would say, 4 or 5 years, right? Can a dairy or a beef bull influence gestation length, right? And we have a lot of genetic information from this bull. And here is a Holstein bull. I just picked one out of the internet. The same is for a beef bull, and not for a particular reason, just to show, yeah, we have these two components, whatever the breed is on beef, and the same is on dairy cows, right? And the short answer to this question, yes, right? The bull has an influence on gestation length, and I'm going to explain why is that now, right? Calf birth weight is heritable, right? And is influenced by gestation length, which is also heritable, right? So these are two together. This is when we look at calving ease, right? We are thinking about both, not only calf birth weight, but you have about the gestation length for the breed of dairy cows, right? So these are an important component. The sire, right, or the bull can influence gestation length more than the dam, right? But the dam will have an influence on calf birth weight before it is born. And this is due to nutrition, body size, so larger cows are going to have larger calf, right? And parity. So the more mature the cow, you could expect a little more heavier, calf. But the short answer to this question is yes, it does have an effect, right? And both gestation length and calf birth weight, they have measured, they are heritable traits, what we call the management trait, right? So, and I just pick the heritabilities. There are a little bit of variation, but yeah, it's almost 0.5 for gestation length. So yeah, you can select against gestation length, right? And I think when we look at, historical data and research and we go there, we kind of find a balance between, you don't want to go too short in gestation lengths, and also you don't want to go too long. So it's about right? So you gotta find, and most of the breed now find that, their average gestation, what is the average gestation, because those are the cows that will perform the best, right? And you don't want to change gestation length. And this is something that we look at in bulls, because either dairy bulls, especially those, will have a specific, a genetic component for that, right? And calf birth weight is the same. It's something heritable, and it has an influence. And both are associated, right? Between the two are associated. I'm going to explain in a minute. This is just to show you, improvement, right? And Holstein cows, over the years, right? And this is a difficult birth to heifers, right? And these are just first calf heifers, right? And here are the years, and how, this is just to show the improvement that has been made over the years, right? So we were, back in the 80s, 1980, about 7%, calving difficulty, 7-8%, somewhere here. And now 2015 or 2022, we all see, we not only that we know that the the genetic component is there in the cow, but also we see the phenotype. The phenotype meaning the cow are expressing that at the farm level, right? And we see many farms that do have, on average, now I'll show now in a minute, less than 2%, a stillbirth on the farm. So when I chat with, dairy producer or consultants, and because they are looking, whether that 4% is acceptable or 5% is acceptable, right? And then we have discussion like this. The data shows that, yeah, you could get, right, less than 2% stillbirth. It's just you had to have a program in place to be able, to get this performance. Gestation length is associated with calf birth weight, right? Gestation length is determined mainly by the calf itself, right? So, and remember, the bull will have a major component on the calf. It's a genetic component. And what happens is the fetal maturity of the calf is what triggers labor. So if you use a bull that has longer gestation or they are heavier, right? They give heavier calf. It takes longer for the calf to mature, right? So you will have, a few days longer in gestation, and the maturity of the calf is what triggers labor via, increase in cortisol, right? And cortisol goes to the bloodstream, and that is what triggers labor in the cow. So the bull has a major component, right, on what happened inside the cow, especially for the cow that is in uterus, right? And and this is one of the reasons why I select bulls with appropriate gestation length, right? And each farm you will have to sit and start looking at this bull on gestation length and calving ease. Why gestation length is so important, right? So here is the fetal growth. This is just to show you data about the total fetal growth, and that includes also the placenta, right? The fluid, everything that is inside the uterus, right? So the last 60 days, right? This is the last 60 days. Once we dry off cows up, up to calving, assuming the farm is using 60 days, right? 50% of the total fetal growth is during the last 60 days, right? So when we look at, I'm just using an example here, when you use, a calf birth weight of 43 kilos or 95 pounds, and you divide by the average for Holstein cow that is 279 days, that will give you, in kilos about, 154 grams or 0.154 kilos or 0.33 or 34 pounds a day, right? But this is just the average, and assume that the rate of growth is the same. And that is not the case, because in the last 60 days, when the cows are dry, right, is when you have an exponential growth, right? You have an exponential growth. So if we only look the last 60 days of pregnancy, right? So you get almost to 0.8 pound a day, or almost, 0.4 kilos a day, right? So when the sire, if the sire has a genetic component that is stronger, right, and gestation is positive in gestation length, and you extend gestation lengths only 5 days with this example, you will likely increase birth weight by almost 2 kilos, right? Or what it is, about 4 pounds. So these do have an effect, right? When you do not select the right bulls, it might have an effect in the maternity. And the way that you see in the maternity, some of the calving difficulty goes up a little bit. And think about calving difficulty is associated with dystocia, right? And stillbirth, you had dead calf, but that is in general associated with what we call, a pain. Is after labor, the cow has to recover from parturition, and pain is negative with dry matter intake. It's negative with, water intake, right? And that is what the cow struggle early on in lactation. You don't want to have some of these issues, because then you start dealing with some other problems on the cow. And like Juan mentioned early on in this presentation, there is an economic value for the calf, right? But that cannot offset some of the issues that you may have on the farm, right? So when looking at assessing a beef dairy crossbreeding program, usually I look for two things. I mean, there are several things, and because of we don't have time to go through all of the details today, right? You know, one of the things that we can look at survival, right, and health event, right? And then the most important is survival. What we are going to talk today is kind of about survival. This is calf death losses, right? And calf losses, right? And something that we do is we go through some of these analyses. And the first one is we look at by the bulls, right? And then in general, you want to get an idea how bulls are there. And I'll show you now in a minute whether they are beef or dairy bulls. And if you want to monitor the calf birth weight, you know, this is something that you have to have on a scale. And we do have, in a number of farms, they do monitor this. And in some of the farms, we don't. But we do have, you know, calving difficulty, you know, recorded, right? So this is, it allows us in a way to see how, you know, the phenotype, how the bulls are performing on the farm. The next one that I think is very important is the length of the dry period. You know, there are two components associated here, gestation length and the length of the dry period. These are two different things, right? That usually are associated each other. But in general, I look the length of the dry period. So basically, I want to understand how they assign bulls to the cows, whether they are using bulls and heifer or not, how they assign, you know, beef bull are only for first service, second service, mature cows. So get a clear understanding how is, you know, services are being assigned to cows. Then understand the dry period, how they manage dry cows, right? And I'm going to look two groups there that I think are very important, because you might have more dead calf, but this is not associated with the bull. These are associated with what we call the confounded effect. And the length of the dry period is 1, right? And I'll share now in a minute. Cows that have very short dry period, right? And cows that have too long dry period, right? And then we also look at how many days they stay in the close-up pen. You know, the close-up is usually they dry cows off and they move to the close-up because they are feeding anionic diet to the cows, right? And we also want to look that, right? We want to look these components, and between these two, I'm also want to know how they vaccinate cows. I'm assuming most farms vaccinate cows that dry off, and they vaccinate the cows. Another booster vaccine they do when they move to the close-up pen, right? Usually most, if the farm vaccinate, this will be any more and less how they do that. But that has, I'm gonna cover that in a minute, because that may or may not be associated with some of how the maternity works, right? I look at them by gestation length, right? And the most important in the next one by gestation length is the twin pregnancies, right? Because this is one of the major confounders, right? You may have more calf mortality, but this is nothing to do with the sire. It's that you have more twin pregnancies. And more twin pregnancies, yeah, there might be a genetic component there, but usually what happens is that it's strongly associated with how you are breeding the cows, right? If you are doing more time AI or you are doing more heat detection. In high producing farms, when they do use heat detection, especially around 60 days in milk, right? We see that you have more cows are prone to have multiple ovulation, right? High milk production is a driver for high metabolism, and that reduces the progesterone in cows, and they tend to have multiple ovulation. This is a management strategy, right? I'll show you in a minute. You can control twin rate by changing how you breed your cows, right? If you start breeding your cows more on time AI, you're going to have single, or more likely, you're going to have single ovulation. Same is like, you extend the voluntary period a little bit more, like 10 days. And on top of that, you breed more cows, not all, but more cows on time AI, and you will significantly reduce your twinning rate. And it has a huge impact on calf losses, right? Then we look at biparity, and the most important biparity is just looking first calf heifers and multiple cows and how they perform. We don't see many farms using heifers. I personally don't come, I think I visit only one, right? And I have a comment about this, and later, I don't see many of the farms using a heifer, but I do see quite a lot in multiparous cows, right? By calendar week, the most important when we look at by calendar week is I want to see, because this is an association on how things are done on a farm, right? How you got the summer effect, you got spring, all the season effect, right? But the calendar week gives me an idea if there is something, redundancy of things. So for example, it might be, and I show you now one, that on Monday is the highest in the week. And usually Monday is a busy day for most of the farm. So there is, you may have more dead calf, but also you may have some inconsistency in the calendar week, especially if there is something that is affecting the maternity, right? Then for this one, by time of day, and in a number of farms, we create a code when they, each cow that enter in the system. So then when I look at the records, you have to create a code for this one. But then I can look when we do the shift change, right? And most farms may do like, every 12 hours, they change shift, right? At some farm I do every 8 hours. So, but that really, really helped me to understand the hour before and the hour after shift change, how is, the calf mortality there, because it might be a component on people here, right? Which is very important, same as when you look at by calendar week, right? And the calendar months that I look is just to see the summer effect, right? And why the summer effect is important is because, it's associated with dry matter intake. You might have more dead calf, right? And it might be associated with the summer and your heat abatement, the heat abatement system, right? So I look at these trends just to get an idea how things are working on the farm. But anyway, this is just the overall picture. We will go through now some of the details. Then the first things that I look is how is the breeding program, how bulls are assigned, right? And each farm, I can tell there are similarities between farms, but each farm is unique. It's unique, and they come up with a different strategy to accomplish the same goal. Add value to the cross, calf. And it's because of the need for replacement heifers. Not all have their own replacement heifers. Some buy heifers and they buy pregnant heifers, right? So, but replacement heifers will determine whether or not they are in a process of expansion, right? Will determine how many beef wool they are using on a farm, right? And what is the market for crossbred calf, right? And then it comes to understanding the breeding itself, right? And important management traits that the programs that I've been involved, Stillbirth and Calving has been a priority for farmers. And then you have different indexes. So some farm might use a dairy index, and whether that is net merit or an individual index that they have for the farm, and they will use a specific bulls, right? And they might choose to use sex sort Siemens, so for replacement heifers, and first service for lactation 2 or 3, right? It depends on how many replacement heifers they need. And everything else they will pick up some of these beef index, right? And use for all other cows, right? But this is an important, the first step when looking at the maternity is you really need to understand how cows are being bred and which wool is used in each group of the cow, because there are many confounding effects that it might look that this is the bull effect, which actually may not. So it may not be nothing related to the bull, right? So one of the things that I want to get is a picture about, the dry period. And I picked 2 different farms here, as you can see, right? So a farm that has a rather short dry period, about 46 or 47 days, right? And a farm that has about 60 days, right? These are completely 2 different management, but we see this one. So this is important when it comes to assessing the maternity, because there is when you do this short, dry period, right? Like I mentioned to you, cows that are too short, you know, just the dry period too short or too long might be an issue. In this particular case, right, we have about 55% of the cows that have more than 70 days, right? We know that this is going to have, it's going to have an impact on the maternity, an early postpartum, right? And things that are associated with that, some of these cows get a little bit more overweighted, right? And because of, remember, we are feeding group of animals, we don't feed individual animals. So cows might put a little bit more weight, right? And what happened is some of the cows might be losing weight right before calving elevated Heifers, right? And they have more ketosis postpartum. And the issue here is nothing to do with the bull. This is just to see how much variation we have, you know, according to the dry period length, right? Compared to the second farm that although they have a rather short, right, about 15 days shorter than this farm, but there are very, very few cows that has less than, you know, that have more than 70 days. So it's about 3% of the 3% of the cows, right? This is something that I definitely look when I look at the maternity. Think about the maternity, you know, calf losses and health event that prepartum cows has a major component in dry matter intake. And that will have an impact in your maternity and it will have an impact on your postpartum cows, right? So is gestation length associated? I get this question, you know, many times. Is gestation length associated with survival, health, and performance? Yes. You know, the answer to this question, yes. When we look at Holstein cows, we know that. And this is why we try to have bulls that do not have either short or long gestation. We don't want to change that. We want to change, we want to be as much as possible within the average. But you know, biology has a variation. So you're going to have a few percentage of cows are going to have long, and a few other percentage are going to have short gestation, right? But we know, you know, if the cow has either short or long gestation, it affects all these. You're going to have more stillbirth, you're going to have more health event, you know, milk is going to drop, and then you're going to have an effect in longevity. So cows are going to go, either they're going to leave the farm because they don't get pregnant, or they leave the farm because they get sick. Right, that we know that by looking at the data and the phenotype of the cow. So you don't want to change gestation length, right? For the breed. This is data that I'm working on, and this is a, you know, beef dairy crossing program, right? And you can see there, you know, we split the cows. This is about 15,000 cows, something like that, and total cows that being assessed in this particular maternity. So we have the gestation length, the 3 groups. The majority of the cows are going to be in this group, right, in the average. But also you have something what you call the long gestation or the short gestation. And I'm going to make a point here, because what we do in this, we try to find what are the explanatory variables. You have more stillbirth, whether they are short or they are long, right? But the explanatory variable could be different, right? Usually, when you look at the short gestation length cows, twin pregnancies are going to have short gestation. So, for example, I'm going to give you an example. If you breed your cows more on heat detection and your cows are high producing, you're going to have more twin pregnancies. But you know that most of the cows, once they get pregnant with twin, they no longer are going to be average. They're going to be in the group of short gestation. And this has an implication how you manage your prepartum cow, especially if you're feeding an ionic diet. Right? So in a number of farms now, we want to know whether or not they are pregnant just with a single calf or twin. Because if it is twin, you want to move the cow a week earlier to the prepartum pen. Because what happened there is nothing to do with the bull. The cow has a week short, you know, gestation, right? And she was exposed to the anionic diet a week less, right? And that will have an impact on the maternity and early on in lactation, especially with metabolic disease. In heat stress, you know, especially when the, you know, temperature humidity index goes above 68 or 72, you definitely see an effect there. And one of the immediate effects is going to affect gestation length. So in the summer, you start seeing, shorter gestation length. And the most important here is first lactation cows, right? The heifers. The first calf heifers are going to have a little bit short gestation. And you start seeing more stillbirth, but this is the summer effect, right? First calf heifer, like I mentioned, and cows, when you extend too long in an anionic diet, especially more than 40 days, yeah, you might, shorten, a gestation length. But this is, remember, the anionic diet is pro-inflammatory, right? In a way, it will interfere with gestation length as well. But you have to expose the cow to, longer period to be able to affect, gestation length, right? When you go and look the longer gestation length, the explanatory variables are a little bit different, right? Here is when we see the male calf. Male calf is usually heavier, and the heavier, it takes longer for the calf to mature, right, inside the uterus, right? And you see in that group, right, older cows, what is mature cows. It could be a side effect, right? It could be a side effect because it's associated with either male or bigger calf, right? Or the other things that we were able to find is there are errors, right? Errors in AI. Right, errors in AI. So actually, the cow was bred, later, right? No, the breed and the cow show up as a long gestation. But anyway, any of the two groups will have, almost double, the problem compared to the average gestation length, right, for the horse. So another important component that we look, and I'm going to use some of these table now, just explain very briefly. These are just Dairycom data. Here are the lactation groups, right? This is about 8,000 cows. It's a full year, and from 21 to 22. And what the table is showing you, lactation groups, so cow fed lactation, second and third, and older cows, right? And you can see the number of fresh cows in each one of the groups, the twinning rate for each one of the groups, whether they have male or female. And here is something important because you can see that the female ratio is higher, so they are using sex semen in some of the, heifers, right? But the most important is here, right? Because yeah, here, remember that Dairycom will round it up, right, or round it down, depending on where the closest number is. So in this particular case, if you divide 158 by the total number of cows, you get 1.89, right? These are the stillbirth. And it is important here because 30% they are using, dairy bulls, right, and 70% they are using beef bulls, right? And most of the cows are Jersey, Holstein crosses, right? And they use limousine, bulls in this particular case, right? So yes, it's important. You can get really, really good performance, and with really, the calf look really, really nice. So the female ratio here is something important to consider when you look at, the overall calf mortality, understanding that, these two groups, especially heifers, most of the heifers, and I would say most of the first service and second lactation cows, they are all bred, right? These cows were bred in lactation 1. So lactation 2 is what they have. So about 70%. So lactation, first service and second service, very likely they use sex semen, and older cows they just use, beef semen there, right? So the twinning rate is something that we do pay attention because our management on the farm will determine to a great extent, the twinning, especially, when we are breeding most of the cows on heat detection, right? And we are breeding the cow with a 60-day voluntary waiting period. And these are cows that, are 90 pounds or more in milk, right? So twin pregnancy is associated with short gestation length, right? And the way we fix this one, right? We kind of, sometimes what happens with these twinning pregnancies, they do have a rather short voluntary waiting period, right? And they are breeding cows on a standing heat. And that is what triggered, some of the multiple ovulation. And it's associated with the liver metabolism, right? It's so high because the cows are just getting about the peak of lactation that they metabolize progesterone so quick, right? And they keep the progesterone in blood so low, the cow have a tendency to ovulate in a multiple way. So for these particular farms, and if we want to reduce this one, right, the 4% I would say is not yet a major issue, but we do have farms with 8 or 10%, right, twinning rate. And the way we do it is we change the voluntary waiting period and we change our breeding management. And you can reduce in more than 50%, you know, the twinning rate by just changing those two things, right? And another component that I do pay attention close is what we call the, you know, days carry calf, DCC. This is important because this portion of the graph is telling you what percentage of cows out of the total cows that is in the analysis. These are number of cows with an abnormal gestation length, right? They are greater than 2 weeks from due date, right? Remember that I give you the short, the medium, or average, and long gestation length. 2 weeks, you know, deviated 2 weeks one way or the other way, they are cows that are out of the normal, right? These are non-normal gestation lengths, and usually we do not include these numbers in the overall evaluation. In this particular farm, I look at all the calves because not all of them are going to be, you know, dead. But I always look, if you click this number here, you should be able to see these 218 cows and the number of gestation lengths, because this number might change according to this. These are some of the cows that are outside the normal range, right? And you got to keep an eye on that. Sometimes what happens is in the summer, because of they change so much, you know, has an impact in gestation length, you start seeing short gestation length. And if they fall below these 2 weeks from the average window, they will appear in these, you know, in this column there. So could beef sire increase calf mortality at calving? I get this question quite often, right? They want to know whether or not that increases the calf. And my short answer is no. Right? Not necessary, because when we look at assuming normal gestation length, right, there is no many different, at least the cases that I've been, you know, I've been asked to assess. And something that I do believe that it has an impact that could be seen as the bull are these, you know, management need to be adjusted for transition cows, and they had to work on twin pregnancies, especially managing the prevention of twin pregnancies that could be done by the breeding program and the synchronization strategy there, right? Ensure appropriate growth for replacement heifers. So they are breeding heifers, but they don't have enough body weight, right? This is a major issue, that whether they are breeding with beef bull or dairy bull, they're going to have an issue, but this is not associated with the bull. Right? Adjust the heat abatement system. This is important because it will affect gestation length in the cows, and the shorter the gestation length, the greater the calf mortality, right? And then provide a people effect, so providing calving training, right? So there are a few instances, right, where I've seen that calf birth weight could increase, you know, it substantially went up, let's say by 25 or 30 pounds, right? And that triggered dystocia, right? And dystocia, you will increase the number of stillbirth, and because this is associated with pain, you know, pain is negative with dry matter intake, you start seeing metabolic diseases postpartum, especially you see ketosis, right? Ketosis and metabolic, right? But the issue here is, could be just maybe you had to look at either calf birth weight, right? If it is heifers, you need to look at your replacement program. Are they growing at the right rate, right? Average daily gain is absolutely important for replacement heifers, right? So another question that I get is, my fresh cows are experiencing more ketosis, right? Are beef sire causing this? And my short answer to that is no. Right? It's usually not necessary that is the cause, unless you have definitely a dystocia problem that you can isolate from the cow. Something important is that dry matter intake prepartum almost always determine dry matter intake postpartum. And what we see when they have these ketosis issues, that prepartum cows are not eating well, right? They're not eating well. And it's very difficult for the cows, those cows, to eat well in the postpartum. Yes, when cows don't eat well postpartum and they had to compensate for milk production, yes, they lose more body weight, and the body weight has to be compensated by the liver, and then you see more ketosis. But that is not associated, with the bull, right? So cows that do experience, dystocia, and yeah, you will have more pain, like I mentioned before, and that has a negative effect on dry matter and water intake early postpartum, and then you have more risk for both metabolic problems, whether that is ketosis, metritis, or DA, right? Think about dystocia as multifactorial, right? It's not only the bull. The bull has an implication on calf birth weight and gestation length, but it's multifactorial. It could be fetal maternal disproportion, and this especially in heifers. It's because they are not growing well in your replacement program. It could be fetal malposition, nothing to do with the bull, it's just the way that it's being presented at the cow. Poor calving personnel training, right? And finally, it could be associated with, another component, the bull side, right? So gestation length, days in close-up, and metabolic profile at calving. We did a study on this, and it was not directly associated because of the beef on dairy, but it was more associated with understanding how gestation length, the dynamic of moving cows, and the interaction between the vaccine and the anionic diet, right? The vaccine causes an inflammation in cows, same as any vaccine. It causes a little bit of reaction, right? An inflammatory process. And so what happened is that the vaccine interfered with the parathyroid gland, right? In most farms, either they will dry off cows, depending on how they do the, how many days they have cows dry. But let's say about 215 or 220 days, carry calf, they will dry the cows, and they will have 60 days, and the cow will go through parturition. But some farms do, moo cows, so they give a booster vaccine. They will give you a vaccine at a dry off, and they will give you another booster vaccine. They will either 255, meaning 21 days prior to calving, or 249, this is 28 days, right? There are different ways of doing. So we were testing in this study whether the vaccine was better at 28 or at 21 days prepartum. You do not want to give a vaccine when the cow is immune suppressed. This is 21-day, window. Something important for you to keep is that we move cow based on an expected calving date. What that means that, cows are not going to follow books. So they're going to go in labor when they are about right. And who trigger labor is the calf inside the cow. Right? The maturity of the calf is what triggers labor. So what do you have? If you move cows on, let's say, 21 days prior to calving or 28 days prior to calving, you're going to have this normal distribution. You're going to have a number of cows, 50% of the cows, that at least stay in the pen 21 days. Right? And you're going to have the other 50% of the cows that stay anywhere between 7 days to 20 days. Right? So it's this 50% of the cow that is very important when you assess the maternity, whether they are having more calf mortality that it could be associated with a bull or not. Most of the time, it's associated when we vaccinate these cows. And why this is important? Because when we vaccinate cows, it triggers an inflammatory process, especially the booster vaccine. This also triggers an inflammatory process, but it's usually the cow can handle without major issues there. These interfere with the anionic diet because you move the cow from the dry off to the prepartum pen, you gave the vaccine, the vaccine will trigger an inflammatory process for about 7 days, and that interferes with the parathyroid gland, the receptor, who is responsible to upregulate calcium. So the anionic diet is trying to stimulate the receptor while the inflammatory reaction from the vaccine inhibits. So what we found is if we vaccinate or move cows on day 28, compared to vaccinate and move on 21, If we do on day 28, a week earlier, you have less hypocalcemia, you have more glucose at Calving, right? And remember that at Calving, you need two things. You need energy for parturition, and energy for parturition will determine whether or not you're going to have dystocia, right? And also you need glucose, because to get the immunoglobulin from blood inside the mammary and colostrum is an active process. You need more energy, right? And this is why when we do that, it's a major increment in immunoglobulin in colostrum, right? And this is just managing better, how we are managing better our transition cows when we are doing the vaccination, and how the interaction between the vaccine and the anionic diet may or may not change something on the farm. That this is regardless of how we are breeding the cow. It has nothing to do with the beef bull or a dairy bull. This is just more associated with the management, right? So the next one is I start looking at, stillbirth by calendar week, right? And these are just two different farms. They're quite large. And about 12,000 farms, cows in this farm, and this is about 15,000. And same report as the other one, right? But what I'm looking at here is by calendar week, right? I'm looking at full year, 2021 to 2022, 12 months, and I look all the calving from Monday to Sunday, right? All the calving from this, day. And in this particular case, you can see, this is a farm that has 1.7 stillbirth, right? And Monday and Tuesday are the lowest, right? And they have about 2%. So there is no major difference. But if we do look at it, what happened in this maternity, especially the other day, in this particular one, we couldn't find much of the difference. Things like this maternity has a little higher, right? They have a little higher stillbirth, right? And about 3.6%. And Tuesdays, are usually the highest. And something important that you will see on some of the farms, that the weekends, for some farms, the weekend is the lowest, right? It's the lowest in calf mortality. And that is associated with everything is more quiet, right? Cows are more remarkable, because we see that, over and over and over. Usually the weekends, things are more quiet at the farm, or people has more, more time to pay attention to detail. When you get Monday and Tuesday, we have a number of activities there that sometimes it causes a little bit of distraction, right? And it's reflective in biology, and this particular one in calf losses, right? So we also look at, the gestation length, or the length of a stay in the close-up pen. Right, and here is the command. I'm giving the command, and here is the command how you get this graph. This is something that I do look very careful, because this helped me to see how many days, actual days, the cow stay in the close-up pen, right? And this particular, what I'm looking at cow with this command is cows that stay 1 to 14 days in the close-up pen. Right? Usually, these cows are going to have more dead calf, right? Or more metabolic problems, postpartum. And assuming that they have the same number of calf mortality, they almost always have more metabolic problems. So this is not associated per se with the bull, but this is more on how we are moving cows and the consistency that we have there. Right, and in this particular farm, you can see from December to March, right, it's a significant increase. Overall, it's 20%, 24% of the cows stay less than 14 days, right, in anionic diet. And no matter what, you're going to see more metabolic problems. But this is nothing associated with, how we manage the bulls, right? Here is a stillbirth by calendar months, and this particular farm is there is no major difference or trend, but we do always look consistent is the summer effect, right? So we start looking either from June to September, especially the summer effect in the northern hemisphere, right? And we look at our summer here just to see if there is any difference in calf mortality. When you look at here is, you may have a few more, especially in August, calf mortality in this particular one. Remember, this is a farm that has 2% overall, right? And it's almost double in July, especially in August, and a little higher in July. Yeah, there is an effect in the summer, you know, and it's more pronounced in other farms. So you can see that in other farms it's quite pronounced. So it could be even higher than these numbers, right? And we look at this and try to work on things, you know, heat abatement system and how we move cows and how we manage twin pregnancies, right? Because these may have a little bit of an effect on our overall maternity performance, right? So this is, I think, one of the final questions that I have for the presentation is, can I use beef wool on my replacement dairy heifers, right? And the short answer is maybe. I personally seen only one farm that do this, and don't see as a common practice. Most of the replacement heifers being used to get more, you know, heifers or the replacement heifer for being bred with sex semen, but with dairy bulls. And if you do use, you have to be very cautious. You know, use with caution here. And why this is important, because to be able to make a decision in using beef wool, there is no margin for error. You know, in biology, either beef cows, we do breed cows early on, either with 15 months and with easy, you know, Calvinese bulls, and usually it's not a problem. But whether this is a beef heifer or it's a dairy heifer, something is important is consistent body growth, right? Average daily gain for replacement gain. This is absolutely important for performance, right? It's absolutely important, and you have to be, you know, greater than 1.8 pounds a day or greater than 0.8 kilos a day, right? Whatever the measure there is. This is absolutely important to be able to use it. You know, if you are in doubt that the heifers are not growing well, you better stay away from, you know, using some of the beef wool. And there is data that look at conception rate, either in cows and in heifers, and using, you know, beef sires, right? And they do give you, you know, acceptable conception rate, really good conception rate, you know, but there is very limited information on calving and lactation performance, right? And I remember heifers are very sensitive to dystocia. Under normal condition, a number of heifers, even though you don't need any assistance or no, they will have a little bit of laceration in the birth canal, and that is associated with pain. And usually you will see a little bit more metritis in heifer compared to your cows, right? So when you see, you know, calving is an important component for heifers, right? If you use some of these, you want to use in your replacement heifers, you gotta make sure your heifers are growing well, right? And then use sire with Calvinese to prevent increase in calf birth weight and dystocia, right? So here is an example where it's for replacement heifers. And the way we look at the data is, these are all the calvings, right? There is about almost 7,000 heifers here. And then I look at age at fair calving, right? So what I'm pointing out here, they start early, they are breeding heifers early, they are calving with 22, 21, a number of heifers they are calving there, very young and live. And these are Holstein, we use Holstein bulls with these heifers, right? And about 70% of all stillborn calf, you know, in heifers, they are within, you know, less than, either with 22 or less, you know, month of age at calving. So heifer development, regardless of the bull, heifer development, regardless of the bull, is absolutely important because it has a major implication. So the overall stillbirth for all the heifers is 4.6%, right? But when you look at this total number of stillborn calf out of this number of heifers, so 75% is in this group. Yes, there is a trade-off, and you gotta be careful here because here you got a lot of saving, especially you save money from feed, right? Because heifers start lactating earlier, but heifer need to have developed their body weight to be able to perform at the maternity and later on when they had to compete for feed and during lactation, right? So regardless of bull, Consistent body weight gain from birth to calving is key for performance and survival, right? Health and longevity. And it's important here how you establish the criteria to initiate breeding, right? Most of the farms that I go, they will look at their, they look at their growth, right? And they look at their heifers. They will look at age, body weight, especially age and body weight. Some farms use the three, height. And but age and body weight, they will keep an eye very close, and based on those parameters will make a decision when they want to start breeding the heifers, right, to avoid these problems. So they want to have the heifers calving and about the right age, keep a balance between feed cost, because replacement heifers, most of it is about feed cost, and that is being paid by lactating cows, right? So they keep an eye on that to avoid that most of the calf losses are associated with age at calf, right? So then there is not a trade-off that, yeah, you save a lot of feed, but then you end up losing more heifers in the first lactation, right? Can a beef dairy crossbreeding program be successful? The answer is definitely yes. Definitely yes, because we see now that we have farms that are performing at about less than 2% stillbirth, and with a number of beef bulls, different breeds, right? And but bull selection is very important to balance a specific key management traits that are important for the dairy farms, right? And that are also important for the for the beef market. Average daily gain, carcass quality, length of the carcass, right? Without neglecting the dairy cow, especially gestation length and calvinism. With that, I'm going to stop here and take any questions you may have.